time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome on in to another podcast by George. Well, he's back. The captain is back on deck. He's back on podcast by George. Captain John Cox returns to talk about air travel and air safety. And a lot of my viewers probably think, well, there's a lot of things going on right now, George. It maybe is not, top of the news, but actually it is. Air travel is such an intrinsic, ingrained part of our lives in American society that it really is intertwined in a lot of the major news of the day. And we're going to be getting to that. And for folks that might need a little bit of a reminder, maybe they haven't been watching the show a lot, or maybe they haven't seen him on yet. Captain John Cox is a veteran major airline, corporate, and general aviation pilot. He's flown over 14,000 hours with over 10,000 in command of jet airliners. And additionally, he's flown as an instructor, a check pilot, and test pilot, in addition to his extensive involvement in global air safety. Captain John Cox authors the Ask the Captain column, and we'll show a little bit of that, for USA Today. He serves as the aviation analyst for NBC News. You'll see him on there whenever there's aviation news, and provides expertise to numerous other media outlets. He also frequently appears as an expert on the television programs Air Disasters and Why Planes Crash. And I've mentioned before that I really like those things. I never miss those. And of course, he's the chief executive officer and founder of Safety Operating Systems in Washington, D.C. Captain, welcome back to Podcast by George. Just delighted you can come back on with us.
Thank you, George. Good to be here. Good to see you.
Let me bring this up on screen here to get us going. This is where people can see every week, really. This is on the USA Today pages, and it's Ask the Captain, and this is just the introductory graphic so that people can spot that. That cockpit that they're showing, Captain, that's a 787. What kind of, is that a new age big jumbo plane of some type, 787?
It's the most recent Boeing airplane, the 787, and it's a modern marvel. It really is. It's the technology at some of its finest. It's a great airplane.
Okay, great. Well, let's get to this story that's top of the news. And my most recent podcast was with Matthew Ho talking about this situation in Afghanistan, and it is ongoing and it is chaotic, to say the least. The question that you answered in the USA Today was, with the collapse of the Afghanistan government, what happens to the airspace? Can flights get in and out of Kabul or overfly the country? Okay, that is maybe for some people, international travelers that might be planning on being in that part of the country. But I guess my question for you is civilian aviation here in the United States being involved in this. Are they playing a role in the evacuation of Afghanistan?
Yes, they are. The Civil Reserve Air Fleet program, known as CRAFT, is an agreement between the airlines and the government that the airlines can supply aircraft as reserve or as additional lift to the military when it's needed. And in this case, it's very much needed. So there are airplanes flying from the U.S. Into several staging areas. Qatar is an example, where the military is bringing people out of Afghanistan into Qatar, and then they're being put on civilian airplanes and taken to a number of different countries, the U.S. certainly being among them. But these civilian airplanes free up the military aircraft to be able to go from the staging areas into a much more hazardous region, which is currently the airspace, which is collapsed in Afghanistan.
Now, where do these planes come from? How do they come out of inventory? Does that affect us here in the U.S. for our domestic flights?
They take a few from each airline so that they don't really have too great an effect on the schedule. There's a couple from American, there's a couple from Delta, there's 2 or 3 from Atlas, and Hawaiian has got a couple of airplanes. So they're able to rotate these airplanes out of the schedule without a lot of interference or consequence, and let the military have them for not an extended period of time, but a few weeks, and then they'll rotate back into the schedule.
Is this unprecedented? Is this historic, or has this been done before? I'm thinking about domestic ships and stuff during World War II. Those were used as troop transports and that type of thing. Have we done this before?
Yes, we have. We've done it several times before. In the Gulf Wars, as an example, a lot of the craft airplanes, civilian airplanes, were used to ferry troops into the Middle East, preparing for the Gulf War, and then also back out. So no, the craft program has been in existence for decades. It is not frequently used, but it's a really good asset for the military to be able to supplement their aircraft and air crews when demands are very high.
Okay, great. Let's bring this back up on screen because we got a lot of things to cover. I want to be able to get through as many of these as we possibly can. And this is an ongoing issue. This is something that we've talked about before on Podcast by George, and it's a problem that doesn't appear to be going away anytime soon. The question in USA Today said, "We've all seen the reports about the increase in incidents involving unruly airline passengers during the pandemic and the massive FAA fines that have followed." Now, that's interesting because I didn't know how big these fines were, but it calls them massive. And again, maybe you can clarify what is the role of the captain and the flight crew in these incidents. Now, I'll say this. It seems like we've lost our sense of community here in this country. I mean, people just don't seem to realize when they're in public. They don't seem to realize when they're with others, and particularly that group safety is involved. And it sounds to me like folks are having to be reminded more than we would think that they would. But that's the U.S. today, I guess.
Well, it unfortunately is. We've seen a significant increase, particularly with the enforcement of the mask requirements. The requirement to wear a mask is a government requirement. The flight crews are not the ones that are instituting the policy. They're in position to have to enforce it. It is, in my view, it is a good mandate. I'm fully supportive of it. And as far as the responsibility, the captain is ultimately responsible for the safety of the flight. And if I have a passenger in the back of the airplane that will not comply with a lawful instruction by one of my flight crew members, that person is getting off the airplane. Secondly, if we have to divert, then it's going to be even worse. But the FAA fines, Administrator Dixon is absolutely correct in having a zero tolerance for unruly behavior. Typically, we're not in the airplanes that long. The mask is uncomfortable for everybody, but as you so correctly point out, as a community, as a society, we have an obligation to not only look out for ourselves, but of our fellow citizens and fellow travelers. So I don't have any tolerance for these unruly behavior and these passengers. The times correctly where the police is involved, the people are arrested and charged with multiple crimes, both federal and typically local crimes, and that's as it should be. We can and should comply with the FAA mandate.
Well, here's what I would say about it. To me, this is kind of a three-step approach. I mean, we've got this need to be part of a community, obviously. We have these people that are maybe they're contrary. I don't know if you want to call them negative, whatever it is. They don't want to comply. Somebody told me, somebody with an aviation background, actually, that they're cavers. They're citizens against virtually everything. Well, okay, if you're a caver and you don't want to put on what you want to breathe the air that all of these other people on the plane are breathing. I mean, if you want to be kind of distinctly separate and different, put on a mask and you don't have to, mouth breathe what everybody else is putting out there. And I guess maybe the other thing is you can't overstate the fact that this is a federal guideline. People blame the attendants for this. As you mentioned, it's not their decision. They simply have to try to enforce it. And people, they just don't seem aware of that. And then maybe lastly, another point that I think about is if you don't know these people this well. I mean, you have to have ID. You get on these planes. They're passengers for a short period of time. Everybody's life is on the line when you're in the air up there, obviously. If they won't do this, what else won't they do? Like, for
That's right.
instance, open a door if they need to in the event of an emergency. That's, what they won't do, but also what might they do? I mean, if you won't put on a mask, to me anyway, I think you might have a screw loose. I kind of want the passenger to land, but that's my 2 cents. That's the way I look at it.
Well, I think there's several pieces in here. The very simple answer is when you buy your ticket, you agree to comply. So you've agreed in advance, or you can't purchase the ticket.
Yeah.
And under common carriage, the law is that you will comply with federal aviation regulations. That's a requirement, and it's a part of if you really read the ticket, it says that. So all of those are the legal underpinnings of it. But if you don't want to wear a mask, then drive wherever it is you want to go. But if you're going to get on a commercial airliner, then you need to be prepared to wear the mask for the duration of the flight and comply with the requests of the flight crew. And you're exactly right. Some of the people that are the most active anti-maskers are the same people that cause other problems with either alcohol or violence against flight attendants or other passengers, or in the event of an evacuation, they don't follow instructions and they want to sit there and get their bags out of the overhead, which puts other people's lives at risk. So the need to comply, when you're in the air, it is a special place because things need to go right. We spend thousands of hours training to handle problems so that the outcome of an emergency or an abnormal situation is good. And the passenger's part of that is to comply with the instructions, to be able to listen to the flight attendant's emergency briefing and be a part of the solution, not part of the problem.
That's well put. That's excellent. I love that analogy. I mean, it's not that you can't travel, folks. If you don't want to comply, if you don't want to be part of the community in the air, get yourself an RV. I guess that would be the way to look at it. Be the captain of your ship in that RV. But you might find that when the lights come on and the state trooper pulls you over for something, that's not exactly, you're not the captain on deck any longer. Well, I'm going to bring this next story up, because this is an important one. Now, United Airlines just made a bold new decision, it reads. Here's the controversial change. Like the song says, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. And this is, again, what I talked about at the onset. This is a big story everywhere. And in aviation, it's kind of leading the way here. This is a story about United Airlines and a very big challenge that every U.S. company will soon have to face. It's the kind of decision that inspired my free ebook, this fellow says, which you can download here. So I don't know, maybe we give him a plug here. Bill Murphy Jr. wrote this in ink. This week, United told employees that it's now going to require its entire workforce to get vaccinated against COVID-19 or else risk losing their jobs. And say this for United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby, our author says, whether you agree with this policy or not, and I'm sure there will be readers who come down on both sides, it's a bold decision. Among the big U.S. airlines, United is now the first to make this choice. So I guess, Captain, the question for you is, what do you think of that choice? And do you think other airlines will be making the same one?
Other airlines, some have said they're not going to require, but they strongly urge. Delta Airlines, as an example, has taken an interesting position, and that is all new hires are required to be fully vaccinated. And in addition, if you don't choose to be vaccinated, your healthcare cost goes up by $200 a month.
Ah.
So there's a really strong financial incentive to go ahead and get the vaccinations. I think in light of the full FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine and shortly the approval of Moderna, I think the argument that it's unsafe, it's unproven, those arguments are now falling by the wayside, and there is less and less reason not to be vaccinated. And there is strong reason to be vaccinated. So when you put those together, I think United is correctly stated that they want to push to the front, and they have done it with mandating it. There will be criticism of it, but they're going to have a vaccinated workforce, which is going to reduce the potential of carrying infection to the public in general. So I support it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, and maybe you've got to be careful with this answer because of your role in the company that you are CEO of. But do these airlines, the various airlines, do they have different corporate cultures that are fairly consistent that you can assign to these different airlines, or does it vary across the board, and particularly when it comes to safety?
I think all of the airlines in the U.S. Have a strong commitment to safety, and there are different cultures, significantly different cultures within the airlines. And as you work with these individual operators, you have to be adaptive to understand that their culture. Some go back to the very beginnings of the airline industry. Some are these new ultra low cost carriers that really have not been in existence all that long. But all of these vary, and the demographics of the passengers vary. Large international airlines have got a significantly greater amount of business travelers than the ultra low cost leisure airlines. So there's difference out of the sort of operation that they run, the leadership, and the evolution of their culture because of mergers. So they're different. They're all committed to safety, but they're different.
So we started off talking about Afghanistan and, of course, the pandemic. And I wanted to finish here by getting your recollections of 9/11, another historic major news story that aviation was a big part of. That 20th anniversary now is coming up. We're going to see a lot of stories and a lot of commemorations and a lot of retrospectives on 9/11. Give us kind of your story, where you were at, what you were doing, what you remember about that fateful day.
Like everyone else, I remember vividly that day and the events that unfolded, the tragic events that unfolded. I was in Seattle, Washington. At that time, I was the executive air safety chairman for the Airline Pilots Association, and I was giving a presentation to a NASA convention there on aviation safety from a commercial standpoint. And obviously the convention didn't happen. But as my phone rang in the early hours of September 11th, both from my office and from my family, and then watching the events unfold on television, we were in a position as the largest non-governmental safety organization in the world of having to figure out how we were going to respond, how we were going to be part of not only the events of the next couple of days, but how are we going to put the airspace system back together? What role were we as pilots going to have? And how were we going to assist the government in that process? And so within a few days, as the domestic air system opened, I returned back to Washington and was involved with the Mineta Commission in trying to reestablish commercial aviation within both, primarily within the US, but literally worldwide. And so as the 20th anniversary of that fateful day reminds us, is that the resilience of the aviation industry was tested really strongly on that day. And over the ensuing 20 years, that resilience has brought us a robust aviation industry, a safe aviation industry, and one that was capable of dealing with that level of tragedy, of that level of catastrophe and recovery. And I think it's a testament to the professionals, both in the aviation industry itself, but in the intelligence and security industries as well, that have helped make aviation after 9/11 even safer.
And I guess I would say here in closing that it affects us every single day, every time we go through the front gate of the airport, basically. But it's changed forever, the way operators operate, the way pilots pilot, and the way that passengers act and behave as passengers on airplanes here around the world.
It has indeed. It was a day of tragedy, and it forever changed the world as we know it, and certainly within aviation and security.
Well, that's great. He's out of time, and we got to let him go. I knew that I'd have more questions and time available. That happens, but hopefully we can get him back on, because the news of the day is, like I mentioned, it's intertwined with air travel. It's always going to be top of the news. Captain, thanks again for coming on Podcast by George.
George, always good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Folks, that's Captain John Cox. He's the Ask the Captain on USA Today. He's the aviation analyst for NBC News. He's on those television shows that I mentioned. And, of course, he's the chief executive officer of Safety Operating Systems out of Washington, D.C. And, folks, if you like Podcast by George, please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, ring the notification bell, subscribe to us on iTunes if you like the audio-only versions, and you'll be able to get every new episode as it releases. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.